I'd like to congratulate, as I said earlier, the UAE on the anniversary of the Abraham Accords. I've been working on the Middle East for 30 years of my career. I've been assigned to embassies in the region. This is the biggest thing to happen, in my view, in the region. In the quest for peace and working and living together, it's truly an amazing development. Thank you for all that you both have done. I would also like to pause and take a moment to thank our close friends in the UAE for the remarkable efforts to help countless people, including US citizens, evacuate Afghanistan in recent weeks. The UAE was one of 3 countries that has taken an amazing number of Afghan refugees and is helping process them for final homes back in the United States and other places. This is also true partnership. It's part of our relationship that you stood up to help do this, and we appreciate it. His Excellency Abdulla bin Touq and His Excellency Dr. Thani bin Zeyoudi are on a tour of the US that includes stops in Washington, D.C., tomorrow, New York, Virginia, Maryland, and Indiana. This afternoon in conversations, the ministers will share thoughts on the state of the UAE economy post-COVID and the UAE COVID response. Landmark new reforms and laws that are being implemented in the UAE right now and in time for the 50th anniversary of the country in December. New economic sectors important for the UAE's development. The next 50 years in light of healthy regional competition. Goals for your US visit, the current state of the bilateral relationship, and Saud's last point on my list, all things Expo. Saud, we're going to cover all that, okay? I take my marching orders from Saud. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce His Excellency Abdulla bin Touq Al Marri. I'm just going to say His Excellency was appointed Minister of Economy in July 2020. Prior to his appointment, he held important positions in the government as a senior top-ranking official, including Secretary General of the UAE Cabinet. That's the body that moves all legislation and policy and gets it coordinated within the UAE, within the Emirates for final law. Former Director General of the Executive Office of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum and CEO of the Dubai Future Foundation. His Excellency holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Sheffield in the UK, and he is a graduate of the UAE Government Leaders Program and Mohammed bin Rashid Center for Leadership Development. Minister bin Touq, thank you for joining us today. I'm now pleased to also introduce His Excellency Dr. Thani bin Al Zeyoudi, UAE Minister of State for Foreign Trade. His Excellency Dr. Thani was appointed the UAE Minister of State for Foreign Trade also in July 2020 when they both came in to help revamp and reorganize the Ministry of Economy. He's been assigned the file to attract the best talents and competencies to serve the further direction of the UAE's development and diversification. His Excellency Dr. Thani also oversees the development of non-oil foreign trade sectors and the expansion of global partnerships, in addition to enhancing the investment climate in the UAE writ large. And in order to cement its position as a major destination at the regional and global levels, and we'll talk about that. The UAE is no longer just a hub in the region. The UAE is a hub in the world. It's a global hub, and that's a huge development that has occurred in the last few years, and a lot of Americans aren't even aware of that it's happened. His Excellency's previous roles include Minister of Climate Change, Permanent Representative of the UAE to the International Renewable Energy Agency, or IRENA, Director of the Development of Energy Affairs and Climate Change at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. So His Excellency is also an expert on one topic, one area that's probably posing the most important existential threat to all of us, and one that the UAE and the Biden administration are working on very closely, which is climate change. His Excellency holds a bachelor's degree in petroleum engineering from the University of Tulsa, a master's degree in business administration from the New York Institute of Technology, a master's degree in project management from the British University in Dubai, and a PhD in strategy program and project management from Schema Business School in France. We've covered all the continents and countries there. Dr. Zeyoudi, thank you for joining us today. We're going to jump right in, given the short time that we have. The UAE has set an example, gentlemen, for the world in terms of its response to the COVID pandemic. From a public health perspective, the UAE has been a global leader, again, global leader in testing and vaccinations. And from an economic perspective, the UAE has introduced a variety of measures, not just to stimulate the economy in the short term, but also to set it up for a long-lasting recovery and growth. When I was in the UAE last 2 weeks, I've had 70 meetings. Everywhere I went, I had to be PCR tested. I had to wear my mask at all times, and I had to show my vaccination certificates. 95% of the country of the UAE is vaccinated today. This is true leadership. Gentlemen, please tell us, say a few words about the UAE's COVID response from both a public health and economic perspective, and how this figures into the state of the UAE economy today and going forward. I'll leave it to you to jump in.
I think, thank you very much, Thani, for hosting us today and last year as well. Being here on stage and last year on virtual, I think I'm going to make this a regular thing. I'm going to make this week a US week. We'll probably visit the US every year, and this time we actually celebrate a lot of things that we do together. But this year we're coming with differently, and we're coming with a big economical delegation to the US. On the COVID issue, I think one thing we joined, like I said, back in July 2020, which we had no experience in any pandemic. And I don't think any leadership in the world has any experience in any pandemic. And I think one thing that we, for sure, that the leadership in the UAE had a vision, had a great sighting on what to do with this, is to get closer to the people. So the first regulations that took in said in the UAE is that everyone who resides in the UAE, we're going to take care of you. Do not worry. And then from there, vaccines, rollouts, PCRs, and everything came into place, making sure that the measures come through. As well, there was a $100 billion package for the SMEs, entrepreneurs, the companies on the ground that came in. And then as well, we came in when the Ministry of Economy as well approved by a cabinet a resolution, a 33 initiative plan that was rolled out back in August last year. So it took us 1 month to come together, put a plan to really resolve a lot of issues that face the pandemic and the companies and the corporations. So this gives us as well measure to understand that you have to look at the pandemic as if you're tightening your belt every day. Do you want to squeeze it or do you want to relax it today? So what happens that day? What do you eat last night? And I think it's important to look at how do you see the aspect. So we do about 300,000 plus PCR tests every day, out of which yesterday I think there was about 600 cases. We're a population of 10 million approximately. So when you see that numbers, the percentage and ratio is very, very, very low. Like I said, we're about 90 to 95% of the people in the population in the UAE are vaccinated. So we have that kind of measures. We want things to come back. In the UAE today, restaurants are back, malls are very open, shops are going back to normal. Aviation is trying to pick up as well. And that's a sector that's really got really big hits, not just in the UAE, but I think globally as well. So that's picking up as well into it. So there is a lot of bright side to the things. We learned a lot in government. We learned when I was a cabinet secretary back in March or April last year, before being in the Ministry of Economy, we learned a lot of adaptiveness and being more agile and resilient. So we tried to look at what was the taboos, the things that was, the bureaucracy, we took that off. The red tapes, we took it off. We had to really learn and go down to the street level to understand how does the company needs to work, what do we need to work with the banks, the financial institutions, how can we have the people on the ground on it as well. We're not saying we are perfect, but we say that we tried our best. And I think there's no country or government tried were perfect in the world. I think it's important to learn that pandemic is a revolving thing, and we need to understand how do we learn from it, from the pandemic. So any future pandemic comes, we have kind of a collective decision making that really works with what really we face that day.
You mentioned the aviation, you mentioned the banks. We have reps here from Etihad and Emirates. We have reps from Bank of America and First Abu Dhabi Bank and Citibank and JP Morgan. Say a few words, both of you, please, about what you did during the pandemic to get the logistics chains going, to get the financial system moving. You made some really smart moves early on in the crisis.
Well, first of all, thank you, Thani, for hosting us. Really pleasure and honor to be again working with you and talking to the colleagues in the U.A.E. US Business Council. Let me just go back. In the last 2 years was very transformative for us in the U.A.E. We're talking about the historical visit of the Pope to the U.A.E. And then last year, at the middle of the pandemic, we sent the Pope Popes to Mars. And then the mega transformation which we did in the last few months, the citizenship which has been granted to investors and talents, golden visa, and lately which was the major shakeup in the company law by giving the 100% ownership to the foreign investors. Mm-hmm. So the last 2 years was very distinguished in terms of the really reshaping the way that we're going to run the business and the economy for the coming few years. Working with His Excellency Abdulla when he was as Secretary of the Cabinet, and then during the rejoining the forces within the Ministry of Economy, we had no experience when it comes to the crisis and the pandemic. And we had, as a government, two options: either that we apply the same model which many governments around the world start applying and giving cash to the companies, people, and the huge incentives which they give to their people, or we do a huge investment in the health sector in general when it comes to PCR, the protocol, and the vaccinations now. And we took the second one, basically because we know that the whole situation is not clear. And if we're going to continue, if we're going to inject money into the conventional way, it means that we'll keep doing that without building the right infrastructure. And we decided to move on, build the right infrastructure when it comes to health, and then start relaxing the protocol and the measures on the economic sector so we can do the balance, which has been paying off now, and everyone is seeing that results. At the same time, we did injected the huge stimulus packages into our financial system to ensure that there is liquidity in the market, and the big companies will not collapse. And the mega companies within the U.A.E., especially the enterprises, are going to sustain it during this tough time. And you're talking about almost 300 billion dirhams has been injected in our financial system. And at the same time, we established a national committee and we launched 33 initiatives, which we managed to achieve the first batch of most of those initiatives, where we're tackling every and each barriers which we've been seeing throughout the system. So talking about the sectors which you're talking about, the financial system, I think the financial system were very satisfied with the injection of liquidities into the markets, and that's why the banks were satisfied with the way that we run the system. But when it comes to aviations, as many countries which is heavily dependent on tourism, aviation has been hit globally, and tourism has been hit automatically. No matter what you do, you're linked to the global connection and global movements and global practices and protocols, which has to move in the same speed that you as a nation move forward with. So we relaxed many of the tourism restrictions, and aviation has started to move on. And the reluctance from the tourism is still on, because they still see that more measures has to be done. One of the which we as well earlier this morning were talking about, and has been as well raised a couple of times through our airlines, they managed to transform the passenger planes to become freight or cargo planes, and especially it has been as well linked to the prices of the containers, the shipments, etc. So the airlines and aviations were happy with certain aspects of the high prices on the shipments and the cargo. But going back now to how we're going to see the forecast, I'm going to quote His Excellency in one of the media interviews which he did lately. We're expecting a growth in our GDP reach 4% this year, and which shows that we're recovering very quickly from the pandemic, and we're doing a mega transformations in the whole economy when it comes to the way that we're running the trade, the way that we're running the investments, where we're heading, which sectors we want to attract, the way that we're communicating and synergizing the work between us as the government, federal governments, local governments, and private sector. And we're not doing anything now without the private sector. They are an integral part, and they're going to continue their role on this new vision.
Can I add some few words?
Please.
I think in history, if you look at the UAE track record to the aviation, we always supported the aviation sector in pandemics and crisis. And going back to 2008, 2009, when there was a global economic crisis, the UAE still had orders with the aviation industry, ordering airlines. And today as well, in the pandemic last year, we still received a lot of the airplanes and made sure that they are received and paid in time. So the aviation industry as well, the UAE played a big role, not just supporting the aviation industry in the UAE, but I think globally as well in the production of airlines as well. So these are something which is to note as well, that the stories goes back to the UAE in their positions and what happens in crisis as well.
Thank you. And I know our partners from US industry appreciate that very much, very much. I came back from, I came to a meeting with Ambassador Al-Ateba at the embassy one-on-one in January. He had just returned from a visit to Abu Dhabi, met with Sheikh Tahnoon and others, and they were telling him about what the UAE's plan was to come out of COVID. And they were imploring him to do his part in the US to attract more American businesses. Last week, I was with Minister Omar Alama, the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, when he announced the 50 on 50, the projects of the 50, if you will, that are to advance economic competitiveness and boost foreign direct investment in the months ahead. The launch of this project, as the UAE prepares to celebrate 50 years as a country in December, is historic. These initiatives are just the latest of a series of economic and social reforms the UAE has introduced and is undertaking as a result of the pandemic, but even before, in some cases, before the pandemic started. Talk to us about these reforms. Talk to us about, I mean, I think you've released the first slate of 20. I was told by Minister Olama the other 30 are going to be released before everything will be released before the Jubilee in December. Can you give us a little advance notice on what's to come? Can you talk a little bit about what you just released last week?
Sure.
However you want to cover it. We'd like to hear about what's going on and what the plan is.
First of all, I think the UAE is celebrating its 50th anniversary by gifting the world and the UAE and the region a vision for the next 50. So the idea is to launch in this month, actually. So there's what can I give you is there might be a launch tomorrow as well for more projects.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so the 15th, on the 15th, actually on the timing.
Today, it's still today in the UAE.
Still today in the UAE, yes. Still jet lag, but try to keep my eyes on the time. But I think it's what we launched last week and the coming weeks, actually, till the end of September, will be more focused on the economy. We launched programs, first of all, on redesigning the whole residency program. So we had the Golden Residency launched 2.5 or 3 years ago. We launched the Green Residency, and Dr. Thani can speak about it, the freelance residency today.
Sir, in my meetings last week in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, as I said, I had about 70. I think a third of the executives said to me that they had just received the invitation to have a golden visa. Yep. A 10-year, Americans having a 10-year visa, yes, or other expats, a 10-year visa, yep, to live and work in the UAE with their families. This, yep, is amazing.
So yeah, we're working on that. The green visa coming in to attract talent. The freelance visa. So those who are freelancers as well can attain a residency. They can, with these residencies, they're allowed to open bank accounts. They're allowed to have a telecom SIM card. They can, will come in and out and, will work as much as they want. And the legislation, by the way, has been done 3 months ago or 4 months ago. Okay. So we are ready to actually, what we launched is not an idea. We launched already a product. I think it's kind of an Apple way of launching products that was last week, but I think it was already pre-cooked in research and development that it's time for us to push it out. I think the UAE always been there and doing that. One important thing as well we focused at is the conference, investment conference that we're going to have. And we called it Investopia. And Investopia is going to be an investment in the future where we're going to bring governments, venture funds, researchers, universities to come together. And let's talk about the future of economy and areas of investments. So it's going to have a small run of it in October in the expo, and then a big one in March next year as well, where we are actually going to bring a lot of that kind of ideas. And it's not just people come and talk as conferences, but come and announce as well deals to happen. One thing as well, which we have, talking about what we relaxed in the couple of months and a year ago as well in the laws. I think last time we spoke, I will say the UAE is a kind of a scale-up nation in the region, not just a hub. And you said the hub, UAE is a hub for the world, but it's more of a scale-up for the world. Where people look at the UAE, how do we scale up our businesses into that kind of area? So 2 months ago, there was a launch of, in His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, the Vice President, the Prime Minister, in his tweet actually tweeted about an Israeli company who scaled up in the UAE, a drone company that actually managed to take a project in Expo 2020 on surveillance and security.
I saw the drones. I was there last Wednesday. The drones were flying around, and I said to my Emirati host from Rima Hashmi's office, "What's that?" Yep. He said, "An Israeli drone company is here doing the preliminary security aspects of Expo 2020.
That's a scale-up project. That's a real-time on the ground, showing that the UAE is a place where you think about a project, say, here's my company, I want to scale up in the region. That's it. And go talk to these companies. Please feel free. Our office is always open to have conversations of how can you look at the UAE as a place for scale up. So these are the things that we're looking at. The other ones, most probably, I think, is actually Dr. Thani can really explain, is about the 10 by 10, focusing on 10 sectors on 10 countries, and then as well the regime on residencies as well.
So you have representatives from ADIO and some of these organizations that are focused on inbound investment into the UAE. So Dr. Thani, tell us a little bit about what your sectors for focus for FDI are actually.
Sure. Let me just go back to the 13 first batch of initiatives which being launched during the first round of announcements.
Please.
In addition to what His Excellency was mentioning, we launched one platform where any investors who wants to come to the UAE can go to that platform and see most of the information needed, either regulations, the potential of investments, some pre-visibility studies so they can understand the market, and even from there they can go and access some of the banks to open bank accounts or to go to the local Emirates to open directly the trade license. So we're bringing all under one umbrella, and has so many heat maps and has most of the information which is usually is needed for any investors. The other initiatives which we launched as well is the 10 by 10 initiative, which as well His Excellency was mentioning. And we were focusing on those strategic sectors. For sure, conventional sectors are going to be there, and we're going to ensure that they're going to be transforming the way that they're running their businesses, and they're coping with the latest technologies and ICTs, digitalization on those sectors. But our main focus are going to be in those futuristic sectors for sure. And we're talking about ICT, the retail, and e-commerce, which had huge transformations and changes and improvements during the pandemic. The agri-tech businesses is going to be one of the game changers. We saw the food security issue during the pandemic, and we know now the technology has to play a big portion to ensure that we supply the prime products and fruits, vegetable to the markets whenever it's needed. The other sectors which we're talking about as well, space, we are still at early stages. Yes, with the Mars mission and with the upcoming missions, we're still in the beginning, and so long term. We start having tens of companies investing and coming to be based in UAE, but we still have a way to go on that sector. Advanced science for sure, which is linked to the manufacturing. Manufacturing, we're planning to transform that to use the fourth industrial revolutions technologies, the robotics, the blockchains, etc. And for sure, some of the other sectors which we're talking about as well here is the healthcare, and the UAE is becoming a wellness destination when it comes to health as well. We're talking about almost around 70% of the whole health wellness is coming to the UAE. So we see we have potential as well.
We have reps from CHOP, Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, from National Children's here in DC, from MetLife. So healthcare is a big, big focus of what we're doing with you going forward.
Absolutely. We saw how strong is our health during the pandemic, and I'm sure it's going to continue improved during the post-COVID era. We're ready. The sectors are available in the website of the ministry and U.A.E. We will be more than happy to give more details on that sector. I think one of the main additions as well, which was announced last week, is the 5 billion dirhams fund to support SMEs, regardless they're locals or international residents within the U.A.E, so that we can ensure that SMEs as well is taken forward, and we can take them into the 10 by 10 initiatives, our exports plan, as well as opening up our markets through the comprehensive economic agreements, which we're going to start negotiating with the world. Indonesia has started, India next week, and we're willing as well to explore discussing such agreements with the states if they're an interest and appetite for that.
Let me bring a little bit as well what the local emirates have done.
Please.
And I think the Emirates of Abu Dhabi as well, they looked at the cost of doing business. They reduced the cost of fees on trade license as well that comes in. That's a huge red tape and cost of doing business to any businesses as well back in the pandemic. So these are one things that we're now working towards other Emirates as well to reduce the cost on businesses starting up. Not just investment, but the startup as well looks at a very important vital aspects. In the Emirates of Dubai, for instance, last year they became #1 city in the world for FDI and PPP with renewable energies. So these are great numbers to see, and it is very important to see how the U.A.E as well is working on that. 44% of last year FDI was attracted to the U.A.E in the hydrocarbon industry. The U.A.E was a very attractive place for the globe as well to invest in, and I think this is something which really positioned the U.A.E as a place not just for businesses as well, but for quality of life, for raising children. Healthcare is important. Like I said, when COVID happened, the leadership said everyone's going to be taken care of no matter what. So this is something we really assured, and they delivered, and everybody delivered really on that kind of sense on the message that they went out.
Thank you. Saud knows well that I always cut to the chase, and I'm very direct sometimes in getting to an issue or a problem that we have in our relationships. And this isn't in our relationship. This is in every single meeting I had in the U.A.E in the last 2 weeks. Every single company asked me, what are we supposed to do about the announcements coming out of Saudi, that we have to move our regional headquarters to Riyadh. And in every single meeting, I said to them, what the U.A.E is not going to have a fight with Saudi over this. The U.A.E is just going to double down on all of its reforms and everything that it's doing to make the U.A.E a more attractive place for people to come live and work and do their business. So I'd like to just ask you, when you talked at the beginning about the next 50 years, and just a little more of a sense or a preview of how you're going to make it that much more attractive for American companies, Chinese companies, wherever it is that coming from around the world to come live and work in the U.A.E for the future, and why that U.A.E is going to stay the destination.
U.A.E has the leadership and has the vision and the adaptiveness to any circumstances that any company want to be in that kind of leadership. Like in a leadership where it's very close to the people, it's very close to the companies, and very close to the businesses. When we came in mid of July last year, we took the rule book out of the window and say, hey, listen, we are in a crisis, we're in a pandemic. Let's look at how can we really look at the whole businesses and what we come 18 months out of it today. We look at what we really achieved today, and we are here to tell the story of what we achieved in the U.A.E. And I think that's the most important part. The leadership in the U.A.E is very close to the businesses, very close to it, and has been always adaptive. It has always been open for doing business anywhere in the world. We have the most strongest logistics, infrastructure, airline, transport, highways, you name it. The U.A.E is a place for you to raise kids, see your business grow, and travel to the region in any continent in a direct flight as well. So that's what the U.A.E is.
If they offer me a golden visa, can I bring my dogs along?
Of course,
that's really important to me.
Absolutely. Well, can I add what His Excellency was saying? I want to answer this question from two aspects. The first one, from internal domestic matter, we're very stable. There is a vision, there is a leadership, and we don't go backward in any laws on any policies that we do. So we just send a very strong message to everyone that the stability is very crucial for any business people and business ecosystem within the UAE. So just with the comfort, no matter how tough the global situation, we don't go backward on any decision that we take. Plus, for sure, the infrastructure that we have, the location, connectivities, etc. The second point, which is the international aspects. We're not anymore a regional hub. We are a global trade investment hub. And our horizon now is the 4 billion population around us, from the ASEAN to the western part of Africa. You're talking about almost 4 billion populations and almost 8-hour flight from UAE. And we want to make sure that everyone can capitalize on this connectivity, the state-of-the-art infrastructure that we have, the services, to have that access to the market. And that's why we're having this strategic economic partnership agreements with many countries. We're starting with the first batch, 8 countries, and we're going to move on. We're opening up. Openness is very crucial for trade and investments.
You announced 10 countries, I think, last week in the 50 on 50. Do you want to just say what they are real quick?
The economic agreements will be with the 8 countries first, as the first batch, and they are Indonesia, which we started the negotiation with, India next week, South Korea 3 weeks from now, Turkey, UK, Ethiopia, Kenya, and India, and Israel.
And these are companies that you have a nascent or beginning relationship with, and you want to expand them going forward. You want to make them new partners for hubs and trade that way.
We're discussing opening the whole ecosystem with those countries. So we're talking about flow of investments, removing all non-trade barriers. Custom fees will be removed, IBs, government procurements, and you name it. So we're talking about just strategic partnership with those countries.
But you're here in the U.S. now, and you're traveling around. You made the U.S. again one of your first big stops to roll out the 50 on 50 and these new announcements. We have a very robust economic policy dialogue between our 2 countries. The trade relationship between the U.S. and the UAE continues to be strong, and the UAE remains at 12 years in a row the single largest export market for the U.S. in the region, clocking in at $15 billion in 2020. Yes, it's down a little from previous years, but it's still the largest in the region. And within this context, what's next for the bilateral relationship? What more do you want from us? What more do you want from companies in the room, companies that are listening? What message do you want to tell them? And again, I have to say, what should we also be thinking about what you're doing vis-a-vis China in this regard? So we want to be there. We want to be strong. We want to be with you. But if you could say a little bit about that and then the China context of this, that would be really helpful.
We're here in the US, not just for business and trade, but to address global issues as well. And the major global issue today is the increase in the prices of containers.
Say again.
Increase in prices in containers.
Okay.
Logistics today is one of the highest, has been in the world the last, I don't know since when, but I think it's important to address this. I think it's important to look at how can we look at these container shipments and the prices of logistics that will increase inflation. I think today the supply chain is lines of the many millions kilometers, but they are thick as a 1-inch spread. One stoppage in one area can really contain for you a huge blockage and a huge spillover. So we need to really look at redesign and reassess, re-engineer the supply chain and trade routes that's happening globally. I think that's the major issues. The other ones as well we are addressing and trying to look at global issues as climate change, as renewable investment in renewable energy, and so forth. So these are kind of one of the most important parts. The other global issue, Dan, I think we're looking at as well is semiconductors and technologies and chips, and which is very important for the manufacturing and production of cars and cars industries and so forth. So those things are very important for the world, and I think focusing on these will really focus on the issues that really affect humanity at the end of it. I think today the UAE and US can really play a big role in bridging these kind of global addresses issues and focus on them to really relieve them in the future.
Your team and the US teams worked very hard over the last 2 years to resolve this one issue in our relationship on IP and get the UAE off the Section 301 list. That's a wonderful development.
That's congratulations.
Yeah, that's a wonderful development that occurred this spring. Saud was very much involved in making this happen. But there's still one issue in our bilateral relationship that's problematic. And it's transcended the last administration into this administration, and we can't seem to resolve it. What are we going to do about aluminum tariffs?
I think the aluminum itself is a global issue, which is an oversupply issue. But we are here today with the US talking and conversing, trying to address this global issue. It's not about trading aluminum, it's how to trade smarter. And I think smart trading is what we need to bring in the conversations on the table to really address aluminum overall, but trading in a way that really make it better for the economy and create jobs in both countries. And I think that's the most important part of it.
So you mentioned chips a number of times, and Global Foundries in upstate New York is now one of it's the second, or maybe it's become the first largest chip maker in the world. And you have a huge investment in that. You own it. I mean, the UAE does, Abdulla does. So this is an amazing investment and development going forward. And we thank you for your foresight in that industry. It's very important.
Yeah.
We have to, I'm just looking at the time, and we have to pivot to talk about Expo, or I would be in a lot of trouble.
Well, so
No, with Reem.
with Reem.
And her team. You guys are about to host the biggest show on earth. It's going to open on September 30th, the opening ceremony. The first day is October 1. Tell us a little bit about this in the COVID environment. As I said, I was out at the site last week. It's amazing what's happening there. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think we're ready to host the world. What the Expo team have done, Her Excellency Reem Al-Hashimi and the team on the grounds, I think they were ready a year ago. Today, the UAE, at the rate, first of all, COVID, we are one of those countries that has 90% of vaccination. PCR testing today is at the price of $15. It's done at a 300,000 scale of 300,000 tests a day. So we are ready to really invite the world to come to the UAE, to Dubai, safe and sound, to enjoy the Expo 2020, to converse, to have a first time a conference, a place where you can meet, travel to. And I think this is something which is very vital and important for us and for the world as well, to really come back in a physical presence. I think our visit today as well shows that, coming back in a room. I heard it through the visit the last 3 days. This delegation coming from the UAE pulls us back to the office, which is something which is really good. I think the energy in the room really brings a lot as well to say for the Expo. The Expo is really ready for the world.
Almost 200 countries. What business-focused events are you all planning, and what will you do to talk about the attraction for FDI and your new changes at Expo?
Let me tell you, I'm grounded for 6 months. My schedule every single day has 3 to 4 at least events in Expo.
We're hosting 15 of them.
There you go. You cannot imagine the amount of events I'm going to have through 6 months, a daily basis, 3 to 4 a day, happening in Expo. And it starts from 1st of October. And I think going back next week back to Dubai, I think it's important to look at the agenda and the scheduling and the conferences, the people coming in, the flights, the travelers, and we are welcoming everybody to come in. And please knock on my door for any meeting, for any urgency. I'm happy to meet everyone.
Dr. Zeyoudi, I know you're focused on business now, but at Expo, the story about climate change is going to be told in many different ways. Talk to us about how important that is.
Before speaking about sustainability, we've been piloting our readiness for Expo for the last few months by hosting a few conferences and see how we managed to maneuver around all the COVID protocol and this restriction measures. And we managed to host many big events lately when it comes to Gulf food, the Arab travel exhibitions, and even the military conference in Abu Dhabi, IDEX, earlier this year. So it was just testing the ground. Are we ready to host the world? And we've been successful. So we're looking forward to host the world. On the sectors, each country is they're showcasing the sectors which they're interested in. So I'm saying that the whole economy is going to be an expo, and the whole advanced technologies and advanced innovative ideas are going to be showcased in expo. So there is no specific sectors. It's the whole out of the box ideas are going to be showcased. So it's open to everyone to come and see what has been there, and how can we take this to next level, and how can we expand on those technologies in the region, the whole horizons of our space. When it comes to sustainability, it's one of the main 3 pillars of Expo, and we saw the almost 1/3 of Expo has integrated the sustainability and climate change practices within their constructions of pavilions, as well as the practices which they're going to run throughout the 6 months. And so many technologies have been moved to the site, so there'll be so many showcased. We should not look at climate change as an expensive, costly sectors. It's becoming business oriented, and it's becoming business attractive to so many investors. We saw the renewable energy, everyone was questioning it at the beginning. Now it's becoming more and more attractive, even than the conventional power productions. And same thing is going to be with the efficiency in buildings, e-mobilities, decarbonization of industries, which is going to be showcased by many companies on the site. So what I would highly recommend is that for the current generations who's looking at sustainability, we're going to showcase the technologies which are going to fulfill the demand of the new consumers in the field of sustainability.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 or 2 quick questions from the audience, and what you say must be a question, please, for our guests, and then we're going to wrap it. Do I have anyone that wants to ask a question?
I think Saud has a question.
Saud, do you have a question? Afshin, did you have a question? Afshin, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, nice to see you both. My name is Afshin Malabi. I'm from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I'd like to ask about these 10 by 10 countries. Some of the countries already have robust relationships with, like India. They're already a top 3 trade partner of India. So I'd like to understand what you're doing in order to amplify these trade relationships, whether it's with India, Kenya, Indonesia. Can you give us a little bit more detail on what exactly you're doing?
Afshin, good to see you. Last year, I think I had a phone call with you, but I think I'm going to see you as well this week. So good to see you. A great question. I'll defer this question to Dr. Thani to answer.
Dr. Afshin, first of all, sorry for your losses. Dr. Afshin just lost his father last weekend.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear this.
To answer your question, throughout the 10 by 10, it's part of a bigger number of countries. But we started with the first 10, where we identified the 10 sectors which we are interested in by combining them and link them to our industrial and operation 300 billion strategy. So we can make sure that those sectors are going to be supplying the commodities and services to those 10 countries. And at the same time, we looked at where those countries are importing those products and those sectors, and how can we be the alternates for those suppliers moving forward. For sure, the free trade agreements or the comprehensive economic agreements are going to be easing this process. But as well, we would like to ensure that the distributors are talking to each other directly, or the distributor in those nations are talking to our manufacturing and the distributor within the U.A.E, so we can have this 10% growth quickly within upcoming 2 years.
Afshin, did that cover it? Okay. One last question, anyone? Well, my last question to both of you is, during the pandemic, I would always ask my guests at the end of a webinar, what keeps them up at night? But assuming that we're moving on to a more positive phase, I'm going to ask you, what do you talk to your kids about the future? You told me you didn't say anything about Disney to your 4-year-old and your 9-year-old when you came today, but give each of you, please give a hope or a dream that you have for your children for the future that you talk to them about. Sir.
Me?
Yes, you.
I think the hope for the future is, in my perspective, I always say the economy is the future for any youth, and hope is creating jobs for the people. I think today, when you look at the economy is transferring to a new future economy, which is going to be different in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time. And I think it's important to see as well what type of education your kids are going to look at. What type of education your kids are going to take in school and universities. How ready will they be in 12 years' time or 15 years' time when they're ready for the market? Will the same skill set that's needed today, will it be available in the next 15 years? Will the jobs today be the same jobs in 15 years?
Do you talk to your kids about, at this age, about their education and their future and their jobs and their career avocations?
With my 9-year-old, yes. And not in that kind of process, but we talk about, she wants to open a small shop. She wants to be an entrepreneur. And this is something where she wants to do her own jewelry and work on that. And so she's designing stuff, she's putting things on that. But this is something where, and I said, do you want to do this, in the future? Do you want to go into jewelry designs? Do you want to do that? And these are kind of thinking. I don't know about, I don't know what's the future of jewelry, but I think the future of it is very important to really speak about what skill set really needed. And I think it's important to resonate this with the youth to understand that the economy today after COVID-19 has really dramatically, they're not going to come back to the same economy pre-COVID-19. COVID-19 have created a dent in the global economy. And I think we're not going to go back. We're going to go towards the future of a new economy, the future of new technology, a few things. And we need to be prepared for this.
And you guys are helping make that up as we go, which is really exciting. Dr. Thani, what do you tell your kids?
Thani, before I answer the question, I'm always happy to be sitting next to His Excellency Abdulla, because he's always doing the big talks and most of the talks. so I just do the final touches. Beside what he just said, I think we have to build the right infrastructure to ensure that our kids and the future generations are talking to each other. We don't want them to continue talking to a machine, and having these smart technologies with them throughout the day is not healthy, it's not sustainable, and it's going to have a huge impact on their future. So I want to make sure that the infrastructure is there, that they physically meet the rest of the world, and they get to know the culture, the habits, the behaviors of others, not only talking to machines.
So you want them to be global citizens in an era that truly is globalization going forward. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. And Sheikh Lubna, when I first worked in Washington at my job, the first week came and sat in that chair as the Minister of Foreign Trade. And that Sheikh, I'm sorry, I was talking to them. I said Sheikh Lubna came my first week in the job in 2008 and sat in that chair. She was the Minister of Foreign Trade at the time. And we talked about her dream team here in Washington. So you can't fire Saud because he created the dream team. Okay, so
he's on my bad kind of side this week. So I don't know what happens at the end of this week. So.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a few minutes left. I want to preserve some time for you all to network a little bit. There's some very other distinguished guests in the audience. We didn't get a chance to ask you to speak about what's going on in Abu Dhabi, which is also amazing, and in Sharjah, and in Dubai. We have the three key leaders of what's going on in foreign direct investment in these three cities here with us today as well. So
as politicians, we did our work. Yeah. Those three actually will do this.
So they're the ones that have to implement, right?
Exactly, but they speak to them. And they have the details.
So in any event, thank you so much for joining today. Enjoy the rest of your visit in the US. Tomorrow I get to do this on a stage in front of 2,000 people at the SALT conference in New York City with these two gents. So you guys are sort of the warm-up band, if you will, today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.